All right, let's roll. Okay. The Gemara in Ksubis, Daf Kuf Beis Amud Beis says the following, and I took these few lines from the Gemara from the famous Vilna print from Tov Reish Mem Dalet in 1884. They made a print of the Gemara that influences us to this day in many different ways, as we're going to see. And it quotes there a Braisa. The Braisa says as follows, the Tanya, the following teaching. Tosefta. Misha Meis, someone passes away. If a man passes away, Hiniach ben Koton li'imoi, and he has a surviving son, and the mother is also alive. Come along, Yershei Av, let's say the deceased father, his brothers come along, and they're his Yershim, meaning if there wouldn't be this boy, then these brothers would be Yarshinim. But now, because there is this boy, so this boy is actually the Yerush. So he's calling the brothers the Yershei Av. So the Yershei Av say, Oimrim, Yehei, Gadol, Etzleinu. We're going to raise the boy. Give him to us, we're going to raise him. V'imoy Omeres, and the mother says, Yehei beni, Gadol, Etzli. No, I'm the mother, I'm going to raise the child. So in other words, it's a big sugya b'chlal. Custody in the case of when one of the parents is not alive, in this case. And what was that?
Is she not the Yiddish of the son?
No. Minat Torah? No. A woman is not Yiddish her son. Minat Torah. So, they're
not Yiddish her husband either.
Correct. So the shaila is, who wins this dispute? Zok the Braisa, Manichin oisoi eitzel ima. You keep the child by the mother. That says it in the Aseh. Lois Aseh, ve'ei manichin oisoi eitzel roi liyorshe. We do not leave him by the uncles who have the ability to yarshin him. Why? What are we afraid of? What? So it goes on to say, Maisa Hoya, there was a story, Ushchatuhu Ayin Reish Hei. There was a Maisa that, we'll get to the Rosh Tevis in a second, the uncles basically killed their nephew. Why they killed their nephew? The Yerusha. It's a lot of money. And this kid was in the way. A terrible act that the Gemara says.
Because if he had the kid, then they're out.
Correct. With the kid, they're out. Without the kid, they're in. And so therefore, they killed him.
If they allow this child to grow up and have children, they lose.
Correct. They lose. And so this is what they did. And this is the reason, the Braisa Paskins, that we don't let these people who have a stake in his death, essentially, we don't let them watch him. We're afraid that this is a drastic case. There could be less drastic cases, some of the Mefarshim say, therefore we just leave him with the mother. Right? We know, for example, there have been many cases, documented cases, of murders where the motive was life insurance, right? And given the fact that someone had a significant life insurance policy, so the husband killed his wife, or the other way around, in order to get the benefits. In other words, these things happen in the world, unfortunately, and this is one din that seems to be protecting against that type of reality. Fine. Now, the shaila is, what is the meaning of these three letters, Ayin Reish Hei? So, the Vilna Shas, Tov Reish Mem Dalet, right on the side of the page, they wrote like that, Tzadich Liyos, the meaning of these words, or really it should say, Erev Harishon. Erev Harishon. What does it mean, Erev Harishon? The first day that the boy was handed custody over to them, the first day they killed him right away, showing how achzarious it was, they did it right away. Okay. I think we would all agree, we learned a little Gemara here and there, that's an unusual Rosh Tevis, it's not the type of thing that we see often. Continues the Vilna Shas, V'hamatfisim shalafonenu, the printers that came before us, shagu bibir haRosh Tevis, they made an error in explaining what this Rosh Tevis is, Leva'aroi, explaining it, B'davar she'en lo shayches klal ha'inyan, explaining it in a way, in something that's completely irrelevant and completely immaterial. Oh, what did the earlier printers say? What did they do? The Vilna Shas, they don't say what their mistake was. They just say that the guys that came before us, they completely botched this, and they're not even nice enough to let us know how the earlier guys botched it. It's a very bizarre comment on the side of the Gemara, and it left many people wondering, what taka did the earlier prince say? Like what is the alternative to Erev Harishon? What is the other way that is the wrong way? Well, at least one person assumed that it means Erev Rosh Hashanah, because in rabbinic literature, at least for the last few hundred years, that's what these three letters have stood for. So an example of this is a sefer by Avram Yaakov Naimark, printed in Tel Aviv in 1952, the Eshel Avram. He was, as you can see, he was a chaver rabbanis in Tel Aviv Yafo, and he writes, Ach be'emes, gam girsasenu be'erev Rosh Hashanah mispare shaper. It actually, don't take the Vilna people too seriously when they macht up the other interpretation. No, Erev Rosh Hashanah makes actual sense here. Why? The Kamash Malon Rabusa, it's telling us a chiddush. Tafilu be'erev Rosh Hashanah, even though it's Erev Rosh Hashanah, she'eim es hadim prusha al kol isha Yisrael, that everyone's mamish sitting from Yemadin, uvechol zeh loy omda b'fnei taivas habetza, and nonetheless, they couldn't hold themselves back because of money. So in other words, he is not so sure that the Vilna people are right. They're saying Erev Harishon. No, it could be what the other guys had before. He's assuming the original was the alternative is Erev Rosh Hashanah. That's his assumption, and he thinks it makes perfect sense. He's assuming that the Vilna people were against it because they killed him Erev Rosh Hashanah. Like, what does that mean? Why is it saying that? Erev Harishon makes sense right away, the first day. Why is it? Erev Rosh Hashanah, does that make sense? He says it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense because it shows you how much of a prikasel these people had. Okay, well, it turns out there never was any reading that said Erev Rosh Hashanah. The earlier prints, if you go back to Amsterdam 1716, this is the famous print of the Gemara, as you see, it actually says V'shchatuhu Erev HaPesach. That's what it said here, that they killed him on Erev HaPesach. And you go back a little further, 1579, this is actually an infamous printing of the Gemara, printing of Basel. I'll talk about it in a second. You see again, Ushchatuhu Erev HaPesach. The history of this, the printing of the Gemara in Basel in 1579, in a nutshell, is that in 1553 the Gemaras were burnt in Italy because of anti-Christian things that it said there. And from then on, there was a very, very strong censorship on the Gemara, and this was the first egel that emerged from that, where this was a very heavily censored Gemara. Many, many passages were taken out. The entire Masechtas Avodah Zarah was not printed because it was deemed too offensive, but otherwise there were many, many things that were played around with in this print of the Gemara. And we'll come back to that later to see if it has any relevance. But for now, what you see is there's no Erev Rosh Hashanah. It doesn't exist anywhere. You do have Erev HaPesach. Now, okay, so the Vilna people were very upset about Erev HaPesach. Now, question number one, why were they so upset about Erev HaPesach? Question number two, why didn't they have the decency to even tell us that was the alternative?
Full write-out.
What was that?
We're assuming they had the full write-out.
Amsterdam has a full write-out. Basil has a full write-out. They're talking about the Matfisim Shalofanenu. They're talking about the prior printers. So they're mentioning the prior printers, and they're basically arguing, the Vilna people are essentially the printers, this is the Ram printing. They're essentially arguing that it was a Rosh Tevis, Ayin Reish Hey, and the true meaning of it is Erev Harishon, and the earlier printers, Pasha, botched it up and interpreted and opened the Rosh Tevis to mean something else, which was Erev HaPesach. But number one, they don't even tell us what the earlier guys did, which is very, very bizarre. And number two, what is so wrong with it being Erev Pesach? Okay. So there were a lot of people who commented on this, and all within the same period of time, and that's also going to be significant. And many discussed this issue, and you'll notice many people think that there's a big problem with Erev Pesach. It doesn't make sense. Why would the simple question is like this: why is this deep? Sometimes the Gemara gives a story, 6 lines. So you're going to ask, why is each detail necessary? No. Why? If you're giving me 6 lines, so you say it happened here, he went here, he came there. All right, we're not masomedayik in those inyanim. The problem here is you have a story of 4 words: Maisa, Hoya, And maybe that's even introducing the story. So the story itself is 2 words. Ushchatu, ayin reishe. So here, each word is important. Fragt sich the shaila, what's a negeya that they killed the boy on Erev Pesach? Why is that negeya? Why is that relevant to the story? And this caused many people during this period of time, 1880s and a little after, to say something's very bizarre about this text. So we're going to go through a few people now who basically wanted to say, like the Vilna Shas, there's something wrong here. No. It's a again, it used to say Ayin Reish Hey, and they got it wrong when they turned it into Erev Pesach. It just doesn't make sense. Vilna's approach was the correct is Erev Rishon. You're going to see another 4 different alternatives of better ways of how to decipher this Gemara. So the first here is, you have a letter. These are 2 maskilim, Yechiel Mendelssohn and Avram Weizenfeld. Weizenfeld was a rabbi, but he was known for the maskilim. And he has a book of all his letters that he wrote to different maskilim. These were big scholars that were involved. These are the types of maskilim that were involved in Judaic scholarship. And here is a letter from 1892. Erev Chag HaShavuos Tov Reish Nun Beis, where Mendelssohn, and by the way, I don't know much about Mendelssohn. I didn't take the time. We're going to be mentioning a lot of names of people. I did not take the... It's definitely not Moses Mendelssohn. The question is whether it's related or not. I'm sorry, it doesn't look like it. He looks like he's writing like an Eastern European. He's not writing like a Western European, so I doubt he's related. Anyway, so Mendelssohn writes to Weizenfeld, and he says that, a lot of people are talking about this Gemara at this time, and they're really, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to be looking at the paragraph on the right. I'm not going to be reading the Hebrew. I'm just going to be paraphrasing for you in the English. So if you want, you could follow along with me. So there's Chachmei Yisrael and Ashkenaz are asking the question: why did Chazal tell us that this sin of murder, and they're like advertising it that it happened on Erev Pesach? And so all the different people are discussing this, and everyone is saying their opinion about the proper nusach, and see the literature block, which is the name of a journal or a newspaper, and you'll see a whole bunch of different opinions on this. And then he goes and go to the next column on the left side and the top. He says, and during this whole confusion, so I decided that I'm also going to say my opinion. And in my opinion, it used to say originally ushchatuhu be'arev or ba'arav. Ba'arav. What does ba'arav mean? Ba'arav means Medinas Arav, Arabia. Why? Because we know that there were Jews who were living in the times of the Tanoim in Arabia, and so that's what he used to say. He used to say that the murder happened in Arabia. He goes on to say, why did Chazal tell us the location? It's because you always, what's the key of a story? A day and a place. If you're going to give me 2 words on something, a place is key. And so therefore that's what it used to, that's what it said, and he brings an example of other areas where Chazal gave a location. Then he goes on to say, and maybe there was a side reason why Chazal told us where this happened, to tell us that this type of dirty murder didn't happen in Eretz Yisrael, because the Yoshvei Eretz Yisrael would never do something like that. It's the Jews who live outside of Israel who are on a lower level, and they would do something like that. So the historical context here obviously is Zionism, and in 1890 these people are very much involved in pre-Herzl Zionism, and that's probably coloring that statement there. Anyway, then he goes on to come with the famous that the Matikim and the writers who he writes, they didn't know anything. So in the earlier, they came up the word and they see the word Ba'arav, and they didn't know the name of a place. What are they? They didn't know geography, so they didn't know there's a place called Arabia. So they read Be'erev. Erev what? So like, Erev Shabbos, Erev Yom Kippur, it's got to be one of them. And so they decided to put in Erev Pesach. This is Mendelssohn's solution. So, solution number 1 is it used to be Ayin Reish Hey, meaning Erev Harishon, and it got messed up. Solution 2 is that it used to just say Arav, the location of the crime, and then it got messed up. Along the same lines, we now move to the second page. You see here a journal called Oisar HaChaim. This is a journal that came out in somewhere in Czechoslovakia in 1930. And in 1930, there's a conversation between 2 individuals here. One, his name is David Friedman, and the other, his name is Shlomo Fisher, who is an Av Bezdin. David Friedman doesn't look like a rabbi. but he's clearly very knowledgeable. Shlomo Fisher is the Av Bezdin of Kuf Beis. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's Kloisenberg. I think it's Kloisenberg. Anyway, so Friedman says, he brings the Gemara, and he says, same question on the third line, Erev HaPesach Tzrichim Bir. What is on the top where it says, Nuscha is Meduyakos? He's like, what's going on over here? He says, what relevance does it have when it happened? And he also says, Erev HaPesach is weird. Usually you say, Bit Erev Pesach. You don't say Erev HaPesach. And so therefore he goes on to say that, you know what it used to say? It used to just say Ayin Hey. It used to just have the Rosh Tevis of Ayin Hey. And the Talmud Torah made a mistake and deciphered it to mean Erev Pesach, but in reality it was a different meaning. Avur HaYerusha. Ayin Hey, Avur HaYerusha. They killed him, Avur HaYerusha. That makes a lot of sense. They shchatu Avur HaYerusha. So it's a beautiful shot. We all recognize the challenge in this shot is that usually you only give a Rosh Tevis if it's a usual Rosh Tevis. But to give Ayin Hey, find me one other place in Chazal where you have Ayin Hey as a Rosh Tevis for Avur HaYerusha. That could happen. I recall a few weeks ago learning in Torah there was a Rosh Tevis, a very unusual Rosh Tevis, and the Rebbe has Ha'ara saying what it was. I don't remember what it was, but it was the only time. It's the only time in all the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim that we have this Rosh Tevis. So it could happen. It's not completely off-gefragt, but it definitely makes it quite difficult. So that's the third solution from David Friedman. So in this journal, Shlomo Fisher responds, and he says, this is a little difficult. He's like, if an original manuscript, this is on the left side, where it says Hakatan Shlomo Fisher Av Bezdin Kuf Beis. He writes, imagine if you're the Bachar de Zetzer, and you have a manuscript that says Ayin Hey. Why are you going to write Erev HaPesach? Right, Erev HaShabbos. I don't know, how are you going to land at Erev Pesach? It smells wrong, he's like. That's number one. Number two, he asked the question we asked, Avur HaYerusha. That's not a helpful Rosh Tevis. Where do you ever have a Rosh Tevis like that? There's something doesn't make sense about that. And he also goes on to say that Avur, in Mishnaic Hebrew, you don't see Avur used in this context. It would be Bishvil, not Avur. Okay, that's the first paragraph over there. Then he goes on to say, you know what? I want to tell you what I think the story is over here. And he offers his own solution. What is his solution? His solution is that it used to say, Al HaPesach, on the door. Al HaPesach, the door. Pesach not with a Samach, Pesach with a Sof, Al HaPesach, not Erev HaPesach. What was the meaning? The meaning was that the second the custody was handed over to them, Mamish at the doorstep right there, and then they killed him. So that was the immediacy, that immediately when the transfer of the child happened at the doorstep right there and then, they acted very, very quickly. And it was difficult handwriting. So Al Pesach, the Lamed was a little messed up, so it looked like Lamed, looked like a Reish. So Erev and Pesach, the Samach, the Sof looked like a Samach. So Erev, that's his solution that he thinks is. He goes on and gives another one, but I don't want to go too much. He gives another solution, but that's his solution that he gives. So because he attacked David Friedman and said that what Friedman said didn't make sense, so Friedman doesn't take that, and he comes back and responds, and he comes back, and this is on the right where it says David Friedman 93, and he says you don't like Avur HaYerusha, and basically he says, what's your question against me? Your question is, how would a Bachar de Zetzer go from Ayin Hey to Erev Pesach? So okay, it's a theory. But then he goes on to say another thing. See the line that starts Shchatuhu. It's 4 lines from the bottom of this quote, 5 lines from the bottom. V'oid, he says, Efsher shaloi Talmud Toya ksavai. You know what? Maybe there wasn't a Talmud Toya here. Maybe hakoimnim b'mei abanayim. Maybe it was the priest during the Middle Ages. Asher censor shokisva Yehudim biyondam nisana, who were censoring Jewish books. And they, because of the blood libel, in order to blind the people, the masses, the Jews need blood for Pesach. So what's his? Yeah, you're right. It said Shchatu Ayin Hey, or whatever it is, or Ayin Hey. And it was the priests who wrote it Erev Pesach, because they were like, let's plant in the Gemara this idea of a murder happening on Erev Pesach because this is going to be useful for our blood libels. And this is how he protects himself against Fisher, who was saying, what if it's Pesach with children? You're right, if it was the Bachar Dezer, it would say Erev HaShabbos, Erev whatever. It can make any mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was done, it was implemented by the Christians. This is what Friedman suggests in his. We have more, we'll call them all deniers. They're Erev Pesach deniers. So far we've had at least 1, 2, 3, 4. We've had 4 Erev Pesach deniers, and we're going to see 3 more. So here is Yeshaya Epstein in Talpios, in Toshin Chov Gimel. He wrote an article on this, and he basically comes with the same problem. He says, the Girsa Erev Pesach is Muzara u'Meshuna v'Tzoyremes. This is very, very difficult. And he says, obviously, this was added by anti-Semites because they wanted to say that Jews kill Christians on Erev Pesach in order to mix the blood into the matzahs. And we know that these guys were involved in editing Jewish books and censoring them, and they had government behind them, and they were involved in the Jewish printing presses, and they would add and subtract as they saw fit. So here, when they saw a case of a murder, they added the words Erev Pesach. He gives a different theory. It's actually a little cleaner. It originally said Ushchatu. Maisa Haya Ushchatu. These guys, they got excited. Ushchatu, add one word, Erev Pesach. Why? Because again, Vaita, the blood libel. And then everyone thought that this is legitimate. They didn't realize they actually got to erase the word. It doesn't belong there in Gemara. It never was there. It's fake news that was introduced by Christians. So it's similar to what Friedman was saying, but different in that Friedman was pointing out that the Christians were mefaneach Rosh Tevis in the wrong way, and he's saying that it was an addition. Now, this in the yeshiva, all the sources that we were looking at so far, I would say, are outside the yeshivish world. I don't know if in the yeshivish world it gets much attention, but there is from Reb Nosson Gestetner, one of the big Rashi yeshivas, who in his sefer he brings a girsa that the Tosfos Rid has ayin hey, and he says, so maybe it just means an am haaretz ushchatu am haaretz, meaning that you're talking about an ignoramus, a lowlife, who did it, so maybe that's what it said originally, Shchatu, Ayin Hey, Am Haaretz, and then they made a mistake, and it means Erev Pesach. And finally, the last denier of Erev Pesach comes from Zerach Bar Haptik, in a sefer that he printed recently, called Zrichas Hashani. He says, Erev Pesach makes no sense, you have to say it was something else, Erev HaChalukah. Erev HaChalukah, what does that mean? Before they divided the Yerusha. That's what he used to say. They killed them before they divided the Yerusha. Or he says, Ayin Hey, and then if so, it's Al HaYerusha. Al HaYerusha. Okay, what's the common denominator that you have in all these sources? All these sources are denying the fact that it authentically used to say Erev Pesach. You have Amsterdam 1716. You have Basel 1579. What would they respond to that? You bring me a raya from Basel. You know how many changes were made in the Basel edition of the Gemara? Can't bring me no raya from there. That's probably what they would have said to such a thing. Aber the matzah is nicht pashut. The reason for that is because let's go back before the print of Basel. So if you turn to page 3, you'll see the line as it appears in the Bamberg edition of the Gemara. This is from 1521, before there was any censor that we know of. And as you can see, this is the first printing of the complete Shas. Okay, 1521. Maisa Haya Ushchatuhu Erev HaPesach. Those words are there, and then it's not the first printing of the Gemara because Sansino printed, a Jewish printer. Bamberg is a non-Jew. Sansino printed in 1489, but he just didn't manage to finish the whole Shas. Ksubos he did do, and as you see right there, Ushchatuhu Erev HaPesach. So in other words, in the very first printings of the Gemara, before any known censors, you have the word Erev HaPesach, without even a Rosh Tevis. So to assume that there was a mistaken Rosh Tevis is, you're going to have to go back and say this happened earlier. Now, we have one Ksav Yad of the Gemara. There's one manuscript.
Were these recently discovered, these 2 prints?
No, these were around, for them, they didn't have access. Today, everything's online. So it's Lachaya. Yeah, before 20 years ago, it would be very difficult for anyone to get their hands on any of this. That's the world we live in today. Now, there is one Ksav Yad in the world of the entire Shas. Ksav Yad means, before Shasas were printed, they were written. So where are those all now? So the answers are all gone. We have fragments here and there, a few blot from brachas, there's one ksav yad of the entire Shas. It comes from 1342, and it's in Munich, in Germany. It's called Ksav Yad Munich 95. So I went on the website today. It's beautiful and nice color, you could see. And as you can see over there, Maisa on the second line, Maisa Haya Ushchatuhu Erev HaPesach. I didn't spend enough time checking, do we have any other manuscripts on Ksubos? I didn't see, but the point is to shtel ein that you have a mistake over here against all this evidence is a very, very big doichik. It's possible, anything is possible, but the weight of the evidence suggests that all of these deniers, including the Vilna people who said the earlier guys got it wrong, it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right. Shma Mina, you have that in the Imkain. In our Gemara it says Imkain. But I didn't look close enough to see what's going on there, I'm sorry. When you go on the website, it's very, very clear, it's a machaya, but if you're not making a color copy, it doesn't come over very good. Okay, so now there's a sefer called Diktuke Soifrim Hashalem that deals with all issues related to versions of the Gemara. There's the Diktuke Soifrim that was printed in the 1800s, and then there's a more updated version that was printed recently. And the author there writes, as you can see on the top left, he writes, Ve'ein lechol hatikunim shum makom. All of these suggested fixes are completely out of place. La'achar shekisvei yad v'horishonim garsi erev Pesach. Meaning, all of the Rishonim that we have, they all say erev Pesach. All the Rosh Tevis, those were introduced later, in the 1880s around. Go back to any one of the Rishonim before the Vilna print of Shas, erev Pesach. There is no evidence whatsoever anywhere for something else, and therefore he says, fixing this and changing this to ayin reish hey to allow other interpretations is completely irrelevant. The shaila, what's the story trying to tell us Erev Pesach? So why is that nageya? It's a good shaila. That shaila is going to remain. The Yavitz addressed the shaila. The Yavitz in his Agoy, so the Gemara says, Nichta b'tzidoy, kamash malon. Why does it use the word Erev Pesach? Shaloi choshu, afilu sheyistamu v'yimnu melasas Pesach. What's the chiddush? What's he saying over here? He's saying the kamash malon. These guys were going to lose out on doing the Korban Pesach, because if you're involved in murder, you're tamei. When you're tamei, you can't bring a Korban Pesach, and so that's why it added that detail to show about it. So this answer, many people assume, is a doichik. Why? If you're ready to kill for money, you're going to care about the Korban Pesach and Tamei. Madach that you have Pesach Sheni, right? Or you say, so I'll bring it Petuma. It's a little bit of a difficult answer, and that's why the Shaila remains. But either way, this is how the Yavitz answered the question. Now,
not that Pesach. We said that has to be a time or a place.
I mentioned that. The Derech Klal story has a time or a place. You're saying that it's the time? Okay, it's just interesting. 2 words. Yeah, in a chanami.
So assuming that it was done before after that's the story.
Correct. The Yavitz is assuming that it was done Bizman HaBayis when there was Korban Pesach, although I should point out that there is a whole discussion of whether they brought the Korban Pesach after the Korban. There are shittas that said that maybe they continued bringing it after, and the Yavitz actually weighed in on that and has an opinion, and it could, I didn't check it up, but it's very possible that he held that it went on after as well. So, not sure about that. But yeah, that's an important order. Okay, so now, here's like this. Let's introduce the next character in the story. The next character in the story also is not happy with what the Vilna Shas did. Now, this guy, his name is Shlomo Leib Friedlander, and he published the Tosefta in 1890 in Tov Reish Nun with his Pirush called Cheshek Shlomo. He's very famous. This guy, Shlomo Leib Friedlander, was famous because about 15 years later, he published a Yerushalmi on Kodshim. He said that he found a manuscript of the Yerushalmi and Kodshim, which was gone, but it was always a shaila whether it existed or not, and he said he found a manuscript. Okay, it's a whole subject for itself. It turned out he wrote the whole thing himself. He was a genius, and he wrote a Talmud Yerushalmi. First, he built up trust with Gedolei Yisrael over the years, and then he made up the whole thing. And it took a few years until people realized that this thing was a fake and a fraud or whatever. And then a lot of things, and they wrote against him, and he wrote back. It's a whole story. Rabbi Oberlander in Budapest, It's interesting. He's a world expert. Anyone has a shaila about the Yerushalmi and Kachim, the whole story of the forgery and Friedlander and where he was, and he's a mysterious figure. He went by different aliases, and he wrote different books under pseudonyms, and he's like a very, very shady guy. And Oberlander has studied him like very, very well, and makes presentations about it and talks about it. But yeah, you could go online, you could read this, the Yerushalmi. This was in Tafrei Samach Vav. That was when he published it. He had a few Daily Israel who supported him. But then after a few years, they said this is not legitimate. This is a little beforehand. So he writes over there. He says, of course, it's Korban Pesach. What's the chiddush? He says, the Kula Alma Trida Korban Pesach V'lo Yisparsen Kol Kach Hadavar. He's explaining that they didn't want it to be on the front page. You know, when you do something, you strategize, you want it to be on the third page of the paper. So, hey, everyone's going to be so busy on Korban Pesach, so it's not going to catch so much attention. People are going to find out, but it won't be so much attention. We'll get to it, and maybe it could shtickle cover because people are busy. Or, Inami, he says, maybe alibi. What do you mean? We were all doing the Korban Pesach, Erev Pesach. We were at the Rav. We were selling our chametz, and so they were going to use this as a way to say it happened when we weren't here. So these are his solutions. These are pretty decent Balabatasha solutions to this problem of why it says Erev Pesach, and we have. And then he goes on in Ches, this is also his Pirush, he goes on to say, and in Shas Vilna, they wanted to say that it's Ayin Reish Hey, and that it means Erev Harishin, but it makes no sense. He goes on to say that this change from the Vilna Shas doesn't really make any sense. One more source that is similar in this category, meaning defending the idea that it says Erev Pesach, comes back to Naimark. So I remember he thought that maybe it could have been out of Rosh Hashanah. So here he says, in the Sefer, he brings the Yavitz, and he says as following. You know why? I'll summarize outside. He says, you know why it says Erev Pesach? It's like this. He says, early Christians, they used to kill Jews around the time of Pesach to take Nakama for Oisei Oish. So because it was an unfortunate reality, murders were happening every year around Pesach. That's also when they have a Chaga and they're celebrating, and so they would kill Jewish people. So yes, there's so many murders that are happening. So it's like you make another murder, and then it could blame it on that they're the ones who did it. So that's why it says, but Erev Pesach, it was touched at a time that other murders are happening, and so therefore we would assume, it's like when detectives are trying to do a crime, there's always the hashkafa rishona. It's like, right? And then one of the big issues in solving a crime is it's very hard, once you settle on a subject, it's very hard to, once you have a theory, it's very hard to have another idea, or you need sometimes a paradigm shift and that, no, maybe something else happened. So here the investigators will come and say, it's Erev Pesach, every year the Christians do it, so it must be that. We're not Christians, and so it would be able to be a cover-up. So that's his explanation for the Erev Pesach. Okay. So, what did we see so far? To sum up, we saw two groups. We saw one group that says that Tainas, that Erev Pesach never happened, should never happen, and you have to come up with some interesting alternative. We had another group that says, and all the evidence is on this side, the second side that says Erev Pesach is, it's a little schwer why it says the words Erev Pesach. Okay, so Darfan Enfrin, you can answer this way, you can answer that way. This is a summary of what we said. So far. Okay, now, Oiz V'Hadar republished the Gemara recently, and on the left side you see their Ha'ara. So first, they bring the Ha'ara exactly the way the Vilna printers did. Sarachli is Erev Harishin, V'Amad Fisim Shalafanenu Shagu B'Bir Rosh Tevis, Lavare B'Dover She'en Le'Shaychas Klal Leho'inyin. Yoyin, this is from the Vilna Shas. Then they add, I think the Rosh Tevis here is Bekama Hatfusim or something like that in many prints. Erev Pesach. Itaka says Erev Pesach. It says Erev Pesach. Vayin Yavitz also says it. Uvitfus. So they're saying and that's probably right. Uvitfus Vilna Shinu v'Hoisifu Ha'arazu Me'emas Hatzanzera. So Vilna, they're saying, willfully made a change. Vilna knew the earlier prints all said Erev Pesach. You know why Vilna changed it in Tafresh? What year was that? Mem Dalid? They changed it because of the censor. So we know in Russia at the time was a very strict censor. Hebrew publishing was very restricted at that time under the Tsar. And Yitaka had a censor, and Yitaka had to give an ishur. But why would a Christian censor looking over this Gemara have a problem with the word Erev HaPesach? What would the problem? So Christians generally, they would have a problem if a text was in some way anti-Christian. B'derech klal, the meaning of such a thing is, that this is in some way, so the shaila is, in what way would that, it's not entirely clear.
Yeah, but the other guy said, it
That what?
minimizes the idea of blood libel.
Yeah, blah, blah, yeah.
Why would the censor wouldn't care about that? The Christians
They
promote.
They didn't want to promote that.
That's not you're saying they didn't want to promote the blood libel. That's not the censor. Censor means I'm taking this out because the Christian is going to say, hey, you can't have that. You're not saying, no, you're not.
Vilna takes out the word out of a Pesach because they didn't want the censor to see it
And
get upset.
If I did reaffirm that the Yidden accepted
And promote it. He didn't want the censor to promote it.
Okay, I mean, if they had in mind what you're saying, I think what they should have wrote is, the people in Vilna took this out because they didn't want to promote the blood libel. In other words, I think Oizel Hadar assumes that this is somehow, I'm not sure entirely how, that somehow this would be offensive to a Christian. At least that's the way they're writing, or they're not being clear about it. Okay, but let's dig a little further.
How recent was his mother?
This is the last few years.
Why did
I know that's what we use in yeshiva usually.
Yeah, this is what we use in yeshiva. Last few.
Why did they feel the need to even write anything?
Oizel Hadar felt that on the one hand you had the Vilna Shas, on
the Vilna.
why? So that's a major question. The major question that's driving the entire lesson today here.
No, but I mean,
Shir
is right.
Oizel Hadar is right in the sense that all of the earlier prints all had Erev Pesach, so that has to be right.
I think the Vilna wants
so now
the Vilna to wipe their hands.
The Vilna,
If the Vilna thought they were writing correctly, it makes sense whatever they wrote. But if you're saying, as Bahadir's version, that they knew they were writing a lie, they just wanted to convince you something false, and they could have just left them Rosh Hashanah and call it a day. Why did they need to open it up and then say it's not?
Okay. I think where we're going will probably help resolve that as well. I think where we're going will help resolve that. Okay. Yes, they definitely could have just censored without comment, so to speak. Okay. So go to the right side. On the right side, you have the Sefer Bar of David Cohen, Ha'akov L'Mishar, and he writes over there. It says in the Gemara Erev Rosh Hashanah. He also assumed that the pashtus of the Rosh Hashanah is Erev Rosh Hashanah. And he says it has to be Erev Pesach, and that's what it's in other Svarim. So here he's saying what we were saying clear, that maybe the Vilna printers took this out. They didn't want there to be internal Judaic evidence that Jews need blood on Erev Pesach. And so therefore they took it out. Maybe another reason why they took it out is maybe because the founder of Christianity was killed at that time around Pesach. It's a little non sequitur for me, and so therefore, because he was killed at that time, somehow, I don't know, I'm not entirely sure what he means by that. I think Oizel Hadar means the same thing that he means over there.
And this kid didn't have a father, and his mother, and then people came and killed him.
I'm not sure.
How did they kill him?
Okay. Now.
Blood. There's no blood.
Okay. So now, fine. So this is where you see in recent years people coming and saying we have to restore the text. Let's bring it back to what it was. It's supposed to be Erev Pesach. Vilna changed it because of the blood libel. Now, here you have a sefer written by a relative of the Yavitz in Tavshim Am Aleph, where he says the Yavitz is his great uncle, and he says, look at the second line. Umaisezu, this Gemara, Hoisa ba'oichreim shal soine Yisrael shal b'chol der v'der lahalis alilos resha al Yisrael. This story, this Gemara, was used by anti-Semites. He says the words b'chol der v'der in all generations to say the blood libel. Is he right about this claim? The b'chol der v'der, he's not right. And if it were true that b'chol der v'der, this Gemara was being cited, number one, we would have heard of it. We don't have any evidence of it. And maybe you would have had a censorship going back earlier. you don't have any censorship going back earlier. And the reason you don't have any censorship going back earlier is because this was never cited.
When did blood libels start?
The first blood libel in England was in the 12th century. The first one in continental Europe was in 1171 in times of Rabbeinu Tam.
Was it like widespread? Like it used to be like every year?
Go to Encyclopedia Judaica under the Erech blood libel. They have a map of all the blood libels just in Europe. There's more black than white. It's crazy.
But I'm saying
in the Spanish, many. Yes, there were many of which we didn't. Everyone knows the Mendel Bailiff, right? There were so many of these different ones. As you're going to see, we'll probably talk about a blood libel soon that I assume most of us around the table didn't hear of, as we'll soon see. Okay, so he says it's time to hold over there. In that respect, nicht den ganzen emes. But then he goes on to basically talk about why, he tells us why this was like a good raya for them. And what does he go on to say? It doesn't say in the Gemara, harguhu. It doesn't say they killed a boy. What does it say? Shachtu. What's the difference between the word hargu and shachtu? Hargu is never ritual. Hargu is a murder. Shchita? Shchita, it could be a ritual. Part of a carbon, shechta carbon. So the fact that it said the word shachtu was even more of a raya, he says, to their side. And he
in Gemara, that's not correct.
Oh, so he goes on to say it's not correct. Why? Because look at Targum Onkelos on Parsha Shlach, where it says Vayishchatem b'midbar. What does it say? Vakatlunum b'midbar. It has no ritual meaning when God says, I'm going to slaughter all of you in the midbar. There's no ritual meaning there. It just means I'm going to kill you. And he goes on, V'shachatu ha-pesach, the Targum is V'kisu pischa. There's actually, for shachtu, you have a different word. So therefore he goes, that he shows that this is not correct, and he brings another Gemara in Shabbos, Shoichet Meshumai Mechayev, Shchita is one of the Lamatas Malachis, has nothing to do with ritual there. But is he right that the word, the diuk, Shchita, was used as a diuk? The answer is yes, he's right. He doesn't cite any of his sources over here. So, the hold over there, no. Was it cited? Yes. Was the diuk, the shchita, used? Absolutely yes. And so now let's kind of try to solve all the pieces that we're putting together over here. So let's move to the fourth page. So earlier I introduced you to a letter written in 1892 from Mendelssohn to Rabbi Weizenfeld. And he writes, the beginning of the letter, he writes as follows. Halo yadata im lo shamata ki ze mikorev ki ze ge'evei orev naflu Semitism ala metzia asher matzu b'maimar ha'pasha taninsa b'ksuvas kubeis amid beis ma'is ha'yish chatu b'erev ha'pesach. What does Mendelssohn tell us over here? A new thing happened. This is a new thing that just kizemi koroi. This just happened that people jumped on to this Gemara. And he goes on to say, V'hareilim ha'ele berishas levavam uve'evlasam agdoila v'harachava ha''ilu la'aver einei ha'koirim ha'noitzrim u'la'hichiach ki kein ha'im min hagam she'yisrael me'yos lishchat yeled b'erev pesach u'lishtamish b'dam. So he's telling us that something is happening recent. In 1892, he's telling us something is happening recent about this Gemara. So, earlier, we saw the Oitzer HaChaim, where Friedman and Fisher were writing back and forth. And Vilna is 1884. Tafreish Mem Daled. So Friedman writes over there, when he describes, in his exchange, again, he's writing years later, in 1930, he writes, Heim ha-koimnim badu zois melibam, v'heim lo hevinu loshan ha-talmud, v'haraya she hu, the raya that this is right, ha-antishemiyim Eisenmenger, v'rolling yamach shemam be'emes heveu es diboiseim ra me'amaymer shelafonein. Oh, now we have a name. We have a name. There are two anti-Semites, one by the name of Eisenmenger and one by the name of Rolling, both of whom brought this very Gemara. Okay, so who's Eisenmenger? Eisenmenger, you go in Eisenmenger and Google Eisenmenger anti-Semite, comes up right away. He's a guy. He actually lived before this time. He lived in the 1700s, and he wrote against Yidden. And I didn't check up his book.
Where are you from?
Germany. He's from Germany. And we're told here that he quotes this Gemara. Here's the thing. him quoting the Gemara had zero influence on anybody. There's no proof that this had any societal influence whatsoever. Now came a guy, Rowling. Rowling is alive in 1884. Rowling is alive actually all the way into the 1930s, as you're soon going to see. And Rowling wrote a book. You see the title page of the book over here, Der Talmudische, or the Talmud. You see his name over there, Professor, Doctor, whatever, Rowling. When was it printed? Look all the way in the bottom, 1877. 1877 in German, he prints this book against the Gemara. He's a festige anti-Semite. In Germany, Bechlal, this Kufa is when anti-Semitism really breaks out in a serious way. And Rowling looks at Eisenmenger's book, is very much influenced by his book, quotes many of his things, including quoting this Gemara. Now, here it mattered. Why did it matter here? Because this had a societal influence. How to have a societal influence? Because the picture that you see on your left is the story of a blood libel that happened in 1882 in Hungary, in a place called Tisza Eslar. Tisza Eslar in Hungary. Again, if you Google this, you can read about the entire affair. But the Kitzer Nimmer is like this. It was Yud Aleph Nissen. Yud Aleph Nissen Tov Reish Mem Beis. Yud Aleph Nissen, 1882. There is a girl who leaves home. She disappears. The Jews are accused. They take a little boy, the son of the Gabbai of the Shul. They torture him. He eventually implicates a number of Yidden and says that, there was a ritual murder that happened for the blood on Pesach, like all the stories. There was a trial. There was an investigation. The media, remember, newspapers are all over the time, all over the place. Everyone in Hungary is talking about this, even outside of Hungary. Internationally, this is a very famous blood libel at the time. Everyone's talking about it. And there was the media, and people were writing. And Rowling, this guy Rowling, volunteers to come to the trial to testify as an expert witness that Jews indeed do this. By the Bailiff's trial, we also had the same thing. You had an expert witness who came, who said that Jews do this. He was a Chaysam, I don't remember his name, but in the Bailiff's trial you had it. Here, he said he's volunteering to be the expert witness. And this catch a lot of media attention. And he in his book is writing and is saying, and he's quoting this Gemara. He's using this Gemara as a source for the idea, with the diuk of the shchita, with the whole thing. Shchita is ritual. Well, you see on the panel on the left, in the middle over there is the boy, and around him are the Jews who were accused of this. And at the top is a picture of the shul, where officially the event happened, and the house of the Gabbai, which was right next to it. This is in the Holocaust Museum, has this card that was used at the time. I don't know what the image on the bottom center, I'm not sure what it is. What was that?
No, it wasn't in his book, this picture.
Which book? No. This picture is not in his book. Not at all. This was I don't know the provenance of this. I know that the historical, the Yad Vashem has an archive on this stuff, or maybe it's the Holocaust Museum, I don't remember which one, has an archive on this stuff, and they have this. These are the mugshots that the Hungarian police would have drawn after arresting and torturing these Yidden. Anyway, there was a trial. The trial happened in 1883. So it's a whole year people are talking about this. 1883. The trial happens, and the Yidden are finally acquitted. They're finally acquitted, and the boy goes back to his parents. It was a real terrible story. Okay, now let's go here. Here you have the Daily News Bulletin from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, the JTA, from 1931. So let's read together. The title of the news readout says like this: August Rowling, upholder of ritual murder charge against Jews, dies at age 92. So he died in 1931. They write like this: Professor August Rowling, the notorious anti-Semitic author, who at the time of the Tisza Eslar blood libel trial, nearly 50 years ago, 1882, was the scientific expert who upheld the accusation that Jews practice ritual murder, so he died at the age of 92. Professor Rowling, who was born in Hanover in Germany, studied at Munster in Paris. He was successively professor of Catholic theology at the universities of Munster, Milwaukee, and he was here in America for a while, in the United States of America and Prague, which was then in the Austrian Empire and now is Czechoslovakia. He made himself notorious by his attacks not only against Judaism but also against Protestantism. Of his anti-Jewish works, Der Talmud Jude, which has run into many editions, was for years the standard work for anti-Semitic authors and journalists. The book first appeared at the time when Bismarck inaugurated his anti-Catholic legislation. That doesn't interest us now. As a retort to the attacks made by the liberal journals. Okay, we don't care about this. Let's go to the next sentence. The book was very extensively quoted by the Catholic press. You hear this? And created quite a literature, but it did not become a political force until the appearance of anti-Semitism, and especially until the Tissa Eslar trial in 1883, when France, defended Judaism against the attacks of Rowling. Okay? So, here you have it. He wrote his book in 1877, but it's just a book. But when you have a story, and you have headlines, and you have a newspaper, and you have all that, information about this book becomes very, very popular. Dr. Joseph Bloch also accused Rowling of ignorance and of forgery of the text. Rowling sued Bloch for libel, but withdrew the suit at the last moment. Later on, he greeted the appearance of Zionism as a solution of the Jewish question. It's interesting that this anti-Semite is like, okay, yeah, I support Zionism, but that's a story for another time. All right. Now, the article, really it could end here, but the article, this also caught my attention. The continuation of the article says as follows. It says, Mr. Chaim Bloch, the well-known Jewish writer who collected the Golem legends, had a talk with Rowling a few months back at Salzburg, where he was living, having opted after the war for Austrian citizenship and receiving a monthly pension of 170 shilling. Rowling was under the impression, Bloch reported after the interview, that he had been speaking with the son of his old opponent, Dr. Bloch, of the days of the blood libel. In reality, there is no relationship. Okay, so this Joseph Bloch is the one who went out public against him. And Chaim Bloch goes to his house, a Yid, Chaim Bloch, says he goes to his house, has an interview with him. He thought they were related. He's not related. It is wrong, the old man assured him, to regard me. I'm no enemy of the Jews. I never hated the Jews. I never wanted to rouse enmity against them. What I hated was the religious error into which they had fallen by refusing to accept the Catholic teachings, by rejecting the Messiah, and by holding fast to the Talmud. That is their error, but I have never been a race anti-Semite, and I have never recognized race anti-Semitism. As you know, race anti-Semitism picked up in the 1870s, 1880s, and ultimately led to the Holocaust. He's saying that he's not that type. Not religion-based. So for much of history, anti-Semitism was religion-based. You guys, you killed Jesus or whatever, you rejected whatever. So it's always framed around religious arguments. The idea that Jews are a race and that the race is contaminating and that all of those arguments was a pseudoscience that developed in the 1870s and that was used all the way through World War II. Very different form of anti-Semitism. One of the key differences was that in race anti-Semitism, if you had 1/8 Jewish blood, you were considered, fair game. Whereas in religious-based anti-Semitism, once you converted, usually you were accepted. Okay. When Bloch recalled Rowling's attacks on Judaism and his contention that Jews practice ritual murder, an accusation in which Rowling's answer was, he answered as follows: those Orientalists were... Okay, I don't care about this. He writes, as for Jews practicing ritual murder, I found passages to support this. Not in the Talmud, he says, but in the Zohar and the book of Halikutim by the Kabbalist Vital. So it's interesting. He says, not the Gemara. In this book, he does quote the Gemara. Not the Gemara. Zohar and in Sefer Halikutim, one of the Svarim of Reb Chaim Vital. What was that?
You know what he's referring to?
No, I don't know what he's referring to. But the Christian experts found no mention... What did you say?
That's what the next line says. But
the Christian experts found no mention of ritual murder in these works either. Bloch objected. Yeah, the Gemara also had no, but I'm sure he found a passage to hang his hat on. So the shaila is which passage? You read his book. Thing is, his book's all in German, so can't do that. But Eismenger's book has the quotes in Hebrew. So if you're really bored, you could go through Eismenger, but I didn't.
Just check it out.
In English translation? Okay, fine. Then he goes and he says, I never claimed that the Jews practice ritual murder, Professor Rowling went on, but I contended that there is a Jewish sect which lauds the murder of Christians, whatever. Anyway, this is interesting. In 1932, the guy is still alive. He's talking about it. This is the guy. We'll come back to this in a second, but here we can already now understand what's happening over here. This was big news. Every Jew heard about it, and many non-Jews heard about it. They're printing the Vilna Shas. It comes out in Mem Daled. They're working on it in Mem Beis and in Mem Gimel. And this passage was cited in the media. They're like, we should clean this thing up. And so therefore, they changed Erev Pesach to Ayin Reish Hei and didn't even write what the previous version was. leading people to think that the old version was out of Rosh Hashanah or whatever it is, and they write on the side that there was a big mistake over here, and their hope was that this would be a solution. We assume that they knew that they were lying, that they were doing this in order because of the accusation that was made. So it wasn't a theoretical thing, it was a very practical thing and a very real thing that was happening at that time. Now, just to tie up a few loose ends, I know I'm going a little over, but 2 more minutes. Number one, Chaim Bloch is a very complicated person. Chaim Bloch is known as a forger. The guy here who claims he had, I couldn't believe it.
The Golem stories?
So, and the Rebbe has a letter to him. He came to America, and he basically gave out letters of the Rogatchover. He said these are letters of the Rogatchover against Mizrahi. The Rebbe wrote to him and said, a long letter, it's not the Rogatchover. Anyone who knows the Rogatchover knows it's not his writing. The assumption, this is the Rebbe wrote to him. The Rebbe said the Rebbe didn't accuse him of forging it. Other people, in recent years, have done an extensive study of Chaim Bloch, and they basically assume that he's almost always lying. He's forging, he's making stuff up all the time. So, I'm just saying, when you see this Chaim Bloch called the JTA and says, I interviewed whatever, I don't know, did it happen? Did it not happen? I don't know. So it could, maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but it's just interesting. This is the same guy who the Rebbe wrote this letter. The Rebbe was very against the letters that he published in the name of the Rogatchover. That's number one. Number two is really 2 years ago, I don't know if you remember this, we gave a halachic shir. What was a halachic shir? Can a murderer inherit? It's a big shayla. All legal systems have to develop an answer to this question. That is, if the children kill their parents, do they have the schus of the Yerusha? So there have been many cases where it was said, no, you killed them, you kill them and you get the Yerusha? No. So there's different statutes about this in different places. We gave a whole shir on the topic. One of the sources that I quoted was the Rogatchover. The Rogatchover brings a raya from the Rambam that you're not Yoidish. Why? Because the Rambam says, Ben Seir Umayra, the father is Yoidish the son. The mashmos of Af al pi, the Rambam writes, that the father was Goyrim, the Misa of the son. Nonetheless, it's al pi din. So he's Yoidish the son. Mashma, that if it's a murder, Shaloi al pi din, then you're not going to be. Then, the Rogatchover right here, he brings our Gemara, the Gemara in Ksuvos. I didn't quote this Gemara in the Shir 2 years ago. He brings this Gemara. What's the pashtus, the mashmos of our Gemara? It's verkehrt. That there's a real, people are going to kill in order to inherit, assuming that these uncles are going to be Yoidish, they're going to be Moidish, their nephew. And that was their assumption, and no one there says, and by the way, it didn't work. And so therefore, he thinks that's Haraya Verkehrt. Okay, so it's discussed in the place in this way, that way. I just want to show you that this Gemara happens to have relevance in that area.
That's with or without the Rosh Hashanah.
What was that? That's only yes, and the Rosh Hashanah plays no role in that discussion. Anyway, so this is, if you take a step back, and the purpose of this year and what we're trying to do, is Pesach is coming, and Baruch Hashem, we don't have to deal with blood libels today in the way that our ancestors did, but here you see a change that was introduced to Gemara because of a real terrible blood libel. And the Eibush is helping that we should celebrate Pesach without any of this types of anxiety.